Well, since we're talking about weather,
What a segue.
why don't
Better than that.
why don't we jump in? Yeah, I guess. Josh did text me. He said he might make it, but he's going to be pretty late. So
Okay, perfect.
let's start. So so weather. So this is part of task B. I'm sorry, this is part of area operation 3, which is pre-flight procedures. So it's not part of technical subject areas. So I'm interpreting this to mean that you know we already have the requisite knowledge of kind of weather theory, and we're kind of trying to figure out how to apply it. So I'll get more into that here in a second. So you know, in terms of talking about weather and why it matters, do you really need to explain? I mean, JFK Jr., Buddy Holly, Kobe Bryant, right? So very, very big name crashes that have happened because of the weather, and a whole lot of poor decision making, but they've happened because of the weather. Go on YouTube, look up Air Safety Institute videos. At least a third of them, if not a half of them, are around aviation-related disasters, crashes, problems because of weather. It's all about the weather. Unfortunately for us, all weather happens in the troposphere, and we're flying around in the troposphere. So all of the airspace that we're flying in is where the weather happens. I have a personal story about the weather. My buddy and I and our significant others were flying earlier this year. We took a trip out east. We went pretty far east. We were coming back west, and we were in Monument Valley, and we had just great weather, perfect weather. We had, you know, done weather briefings the whole time. We were constantly looking at the weather, but man, when we went out to the plane that morning, we had frost on it, but that was really the only problem. It was clear skies, no winds. I mean, it was frickin' beautiful. And we launched, and we ended up landing inside of the Grand Canyon at gosh, I can't think of the airport on the far east side of the Grand Canyon. It's one of the only airports you can land inside of the Grand Canyon rim. Really, really cool experience. Beautiful day, still just incredibly great weather. That airport, we didn't have very good service. I don't think we had service. It was untowered, and so we launched out of it to fly the Grand Canyon corridors, and eventually would come in and land at Grand Canyon Airport in the middle of the Grand Canyon. So as we're approaching Grand Canyon Airport, things start getting really bumpy. I've had the good fortune in my 350 hours of flying in quite a bit of turbulence, not a whole lot. Yeah.
Is there a way that you can point it out to us? Like, can you be like...
Sure. Yeah. So we're coming back. Ooh, how do I get rid of this thing up here? Dock to bottom, there we go. So we're coming back over the Grand Canyon. Where the heck am I here? So we, Marble Canyon, that's what it's called. We took off and we landed in Marble Canyon, which is on the north side of the Grand Canyon right here. It's inside of the rim. And then we took off and we started flying the corridors, which are just routes you can fly across the Grand Canyon. And then we came into land right here at Grand Canyon National Park. I was the flying pilot. We had not done a weather briefing. I think we did one the day before, but we hadn't done a weather briefing. Everything was clear skies, unrestricted visibility. And right around somewhere up here, we just started getting rocked, like absolutely rocked. And we ended up landing at Grand Canyon Airport. I do believe the winds were gusting over 30. I think they were like 35. It was not a good landing. After we landed, radioed to the tower controller and said, "What'd you think of that landing?" And the tower controller said, "Which one?" I think I counted 3. It was bad, but it was pretty violent. And so we landed and talked to the line guy and said, geez, what happened? Like, it was such a nice day. And he was like, you didn't see the storm forecasting? Like, dude, it's coming down from the north. Like, take a look at anything. We open up ForeFlight, and sure enough, I mean, this massive weather system was moving in. 24 hours prior, we ran our briefings and we didn't catch it. Short story is we got out of there, but it was a pretty violent ride out of there until we got probably 200 miles to the west. I ended up flying the whole way home, 4 hours back to Montgomery. It wasn't fun, but crisis averted because we got lucky. A lot of people don't get lucky when you don't check the weather. And we looked up and we went, oh, gee, everything's fine. And we had been flying around for 3 days at that time. We had been doing weather briefings and we got lazy. 2 experienced pilots getting lazy could have cost us a lot more. So that's why weather matters. And that's what we're talking about today is weather. So let's get started. I'm gonna stop sharing here and I'll share again in a minute. So why does weather matter? Well, we talked about why weather matters, but really, what we want out of you, the student, is to be a confident pilot, to be able to assess risk and decide, every flight has risk in it, every single one. You can't get rid of all of the risk, but getting a weather briefing and deciding a go, no-go decision is all about management of that risk and whether that risk is palatable to you and whether you're prepared for that risk. That's what we're talking about here. It's about operating inside of the envelope of your personal minimums, and it's about having a decent chance of getting home at the end of it. So that's what we're talking about here. What I'm going to go over, I'm going to start actually in maybe a little bit of a unconventional way and talk about personal minimums. Then we're going to talk about obtaining weather information, forecast information, real-time in-air weather information. We're going to learn how to recognize hazards and ultimately be able to make a well-informed go, no-go decision. That's what we're trying to get at here. What I'm assuming out of you, the student, is that you're somewhere post-solo, probably preparing for cross countries. You have a basic level of weather theory already. You know about highs and lows, fronts, atmospheric stability, types and conditions of fog, of clouds, how you accumulate icing, things like that. If you have questions on that stuff as I go through this, as we talk about it, feel free to ask. I mean, oh, well, what was the low pressure system again? Does that go right or left? Fair game. But we're going to assume that requisite level of knowledge and we're going to build on that. Really what I call this lesson is this is the pragmatic student's approach to weather. So talking about personal minimums, I believe every pilot should have personal minimums. We all say we have them. How many people have documented them? You, the student that's post-solo, you have personal minimums that I wrote into your logbook. Things like you can't fly unless you have 9 miles of visibility. Things like you can't fly if the clouds aren't 2,000 feet above your highest intended route, or 5,000 feet, or the winds can't be more than 8. You have personal minimums only because I've prescribed them for you. What I want at the end of this meeting, at the end of this lesson, is for you to sit down and think about when you become a private pilot, What are your personal minimums? What are those things that unshakably will result in a no-go decision for you? I want to share mine because mine are actually written down. I've shared them with other people to hold me accountable. Half of mine have to do with IFR stuff, so they won't pertain to you, the VFR pilot, but I think that this is good to share. So for me to take off, I need at least the minimums to get back to the airport that I'm taking off from on the approach plus 100 feet. If you're not an IFR pilot, you won't understand that, but that's my personal minimum for taking off in the first place. At the destination, I need to be able to shoot the best approach, and I need 200 feet ceilings over the minimums for that. I need 1 1/4 mile visibility for both takeoffs and landings. Here's where, these are maybe applicable to you, the VFR student. I will not go through any yellow radar returns. I'll go through green radar returns. I won't go through yellow. What's interesting is there convective activity? We've learned about convective activity. We've learned about cumulonimbus and thunderstorms. Is a thunderstorm before the first lightning strike? The answer is no, it's not. So until a lightning strike, you at best have a convective outlook. You at best have chances of convected activity. Until that lightning strike happens, there's still a risk. There's still tremendous amounts of upward pressure. There's still a lot of rain and precip, probably bad visibility. So yellow radar returns for me are a no-go. And we'll see what we mean by that in a few minutes here. I won't do sustained IMC without a good autopilot. The winds aloft, if I'm crossing a ridge line, the winds aloft at that ridge line cannot be greater than 30 knots. If I'm flying through clouds, I need at least over 3 degrees Celsius to fly into those clouds because I don't want icing. In terms of crosswinds, I will fly as long as the crosswind component is less than the max demonstrated for that aircraft. If I'm flying a 172, I won't fly if the crosswinds are more than 15 knots. And that's me personally, that's not what you should be. Runways, I want 75% longer than the POH calculations say I need for takeoff and landing. If I'm flying approaches, I need 3 approaches in the last 2 months in the make, model, and avionics stack of the airplane that I'm flying. And I want, in all conditions, VFR, IFR, night, day, I want 1 hour of fuel reserves. Those are my personal minimums. I share those not because I think you, the student, should identify them, but I share them because they're documented and I follow them. My rule for personal minimum is I can change them whenever I want. You're evolving as a pilot. The only time you can't change your personal minimums are the day that you're flying the aircraft. If you want to change them, great. Do them the next day. Do them on a day that you're not flying the aircraft. So for you, the almost private pilot student, what are good personal minimums to adopt? I would suggest 10 miles of visibility. Why? Well, because 9 miles of visibility, we rarely see 9. We always see, 10 miles of visibility. Does that mean you actually have 10 miles of visibility? No, it's probably closer to 30 or 40. When you have a day of 9 miles of visibility, it's really easy to not see familiar sights that you're used to, like mountain ranges or that peak that I always use to orient myself. I'd suggest 10 miles of visibility as a good minimum when you first get your private pilot license. I'd suggest that you stay 200 or 2,000 feet under bases. I'd suggest you don't fly in any type of precipitation. I'd suggest that you think about any air met that you see. I'm not saying it's a no-go. I think you should think about it. Absolutely do not fly in any SIGMETs. And look at all PIREPs that you see, and we'll talk about what that looks like here in a second. I'd suggest that total winds at the surface should be less than 15 knots. I'd suggest crosswinds less than 10 knots. I'd suggest that winds at the peaks, if you're flying a mountain range, be less than 20 knots. I'd suggest 2 hours of fuel reserves. That's a lot, but you want outs, and we'll see how important that is as I dive into weather. And then I'd suggest runways twice as long as you need per the POH. Why? Well, because planes if you don't get them on VREF when you go into land, if you don't get them on perfect speed, if you do something stupid or silly, or you come in too fast, or the density altitude is hotter than you thought it'd be, or anything like that, becomes really easy to fly into trees at the end. That's not exactly related to weather, but it is. What if you have gusty winds at the surface that you didn't anticipate, and you come in with that gust factor and you're fast? You want that margin of error in runway lengths. Some personal minimums that I'd suggest. So why are we starting with personal minimums? This is about weather, not personal minimums. It's because at the end of the weather decision, the thing that matters is going or not going. And if you don't have hard and fast rules that determine whether you can go or not go, you open it up to a lot of judgment. You open it up to a lot of chance of hazardous attitudes, and you open it up to a lot of chance of get-there-itis. And we want to eliminate as much of that as possible. So with that said, why does a weather briefing matter? Well, because the FARs say that it does. 91.103 says you are required to, anytime you're flying around, not in the vicinity of the airport that you started from, you're required to familiarize yourself with all pertinent information of that flight. One of the big things it calls out is weather. You've got to know about the weather. There is a legal ramification of not knowing about the weather, but that's probably the most irrelevant reason you need to know this stuff. The most relevant reason is to not be Kobe, is to not be Buddy Holly. So that's why weather matters. So how do we get weather? How do we form this decision? You know about all the weather theory already. So the first thing that I want to cover is there is a difference between an observation, a METAR, and a forecast, a TAF, right? A METAR is what we actually saw, either a computer or a person, what we observe, what we know to be true at that given moment. A forecast is either a computer or a person taking all available information that they have and guessing. It's an educated guess, it's a scientific guess, but it's a guess. We don't know. We get frustrated with meteorologists all the time. They said it was going to be sunny. Why are there clouds? Well, those are people that get paid a lot of money to figure this stuff out, and they're getting it wrong. You, the casual observer to weather, the private pilot, you don't have as much education as a meteorologist does. Do you think you're going to get it right every time? That's why that fudge factor is so important, and that's also why it's so important to cross-reference weather information that you get in form as complete of a picture as possible. So with that said, how do we do this? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to walk you through my approach to weather. Again, the pragmatic approach to weather. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to jump into Google Chrome. First thing I'd suggest, get a general picture of the weather. Watch the news, watch the weather forecast, look at, a weather app like Dark Sky. Windy, I think, is a great application. Apple Weather, fantastic. Look at your destination, look at where you're coming from. There are other generally available websites that I think are really great for weather that maybe have a little bit of an aviation focus. This is one I found, I think, when I was a private pilot. I just have it bookmarked. I don't even know what it's called. I guess US AirNet. But you can look here. It's only for 3 days, but it shows me the temperature, the cloud cover every 3-hour increments, shows me the wind direction, the average wind speeds. It shows me cloud bases, shows me their forecast for visibility, chances of precipitation. I'm not saying that this is perfect at all, but I think this gives you, in a really, really easy way, it gives you an idea of what's going on Sunday. If I'm going somewhere for the weekend, what can I expect on Sunday as a general rule? So that's where I would start, the very, very general stuff that you could show your parents and they would be able to make sense of it. Obviously, that's not enough. So then where do we go past there? I'd suggest aviationweather.gov. We could do an hour, we could do 2 hours, we could probably do all night on aviationweather.gov. So I'm going to show you the things that I think matter the most in like 2 or 3 minutes on aviationweather.gov. So you go to aviationweather.gov, you're presented immediately with this graphical representation of the US. You can scroll in to where you are going to be flying. And you can do some overlays on it. We can look at METARs. We can overlay METARs on it. We can look at TAFs. on it. We can look at air mets. We can look at pyreps. We can look at sigmets. Really quick way to inform a general picture of what's going on. So that's the first thing I would do, is kind of take a look at this stuff. You know, let's look at pyreps. Let's look at air mets. Let's look at sigmets. I guess there's no pyreps right now anywhere. Very few people flying around. But I'd at least look at these buttons here at the top. They're at the top on the homepage of Aviation Weather for a reason. These are the big things that we need to be looking at. If you want to go deeper, I'd suggest you do. Come down here under User Tools, click on Standard Briefing. Now we're going to be getting into what a weather briefing is. So you can kind of step yourself through a weather briefing if you want. Top to bottom. Some of this stuff matters more than others. Some of this stuff's going to be a personal value call on whether you think it's important or not. Do I think you need to look at the surface analysis for every flight that you take? No, I don't. I think it's great if you do. I think it's great to understand there's a prevailing area of low pressure right now in the kind of northeast part of our route of flight. I'm saying we're flying to Palm Springs right now, for instance. But does this give you as much information as the other things that I'm going to show you? Probably not. But there's a lot of great information here on the standard briefing screen of aviation weather. I'd again, at least look at sigmets, look at air mets, look at pyreps, look at graphical air mets. Take a look at your radar summary. Take a look at the METARs for where you're coming from and where you're going. Take a look at the TAFs. Take a look at the winds aloft. I talked about those personal minimums at the very beginning because those are the questions we need to answer. If I don't look at winds aloft and I'm crossing, so I'm saying we're flying from Montgomery over to Palm Springs, I'm going to be crossing Julian, I'm going to be getting really close to San Jacinto. How can I possibly say that the winds at the peak of the range, of the mountain range there, are less than 30 knots? Well, I need to look at winds aloft. Right, so these are the things that I would encourage you to be looking at in the standard briefing of aviationweather.gov. The last thing that I would look at on aviationweather.gov, if you look at nothing else, I'd play around with the graphical forecast for aviation. You can pick, this is obviously very busy because we're looking at it very far away, but you can pick the time period that you're going to be flying, and you can overlay a whole lot of stuff on here. Right now we're looking at TAFs. We can overlay clouds. We can look at the ceilings of clouds. We can look at the bases of clouds. We can look at the types of clouds. Really, really good pieces that we can use to start to form a picture. But what I will say about aviationweather.gov is it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's absolutely everything we need, but you have to know where to find it. You have to have a routine that you go through. I have my routine. I kind of shared a little bit of that here, but the important part is that you have a routine to go through because you don't want to miss things. So I think that this is a great resource. It's an official resource, but do I look at aviationweather.gov for every flight that I make? No, and I'll show you why. And again, feel free to interrupt me at any point if this doesn't make sense or if you have questions. So I like insurance policies. 1-800-WX-BRIEF is, I think, a phenomenal insurance policy, Lighthouse Flight Service. So you can call, you can talk to a human and get a briefing from a human on your route of flight. I've built this script that you just need to fill out the top, and then you can call 1-800-WX-BRIEF, and they'll tell you what the weather is going to be. Hi, 1-800-WX-BRIEF. My tail number is November 12345. I'm a Cessna 172. I need a standard weather briefing for a VFR flight departing at 20 Zulu, and it's going to take approximately 1 hour. I'm going to Palm Springs. My altitude in flight is going to be 7,500 feet. I'm sorry, my time en route is going to be 1 hour. I was departing at, 20 Zulu. And then they'll say, okay, great, let's walk through it. And this is generally the format that they'll give you back. They're going to talk to you about air mets and sigmets. They're going to give you a synopsis of the weather, kind of the stuff that you would have seen on this website. They're going to talk to you about the current conditions at your departure and at your arrival airport. They're going to give you the forecast at your departure and arrival airport. They're going to be giving you the area forecast, so along the route of flight. They're going to be giving you pilot reports, PIREPs, winds aloft, NOTAMs. They're going to actually get as explicit and specific as you want. They'll actually ask you, all right, we've got NOTAMs at Palm Springs, including taxiway closures. Do you want those? And you can say yes or no. And then at the very end of this, if you tell them it's a VFR flight, they might say VFR flight is not recommended. Wow, they're making a kind of a go, no-go decision for you. They are the meteorologist. You're telling them you want to do a VFR flight, and they're saying VFR flight not recommended. You think it's a good idea to do a VFR flight anyway? So these are the things that I would look at with a Leidos or with a 1-800-WX briefing. It's great. It's an insurance policy. Somebody else is interpreting it. Do I think you should only do this? No, I think you should familiarize yourself with the weather briefing. I think you should use aviationweather.gov. I think you should use what I'm about to show you as well. But if you do nothing else, this is what I think you should do. This person, that's all they're doing on the other end, is doing weather briefings. It's a great insurance policy. It's an idiot check. It's free. And there's a record that you called. Remember back to 91-103, it says you're required to become familiar with all this stuff. Well, this checks the box. There's a record that you, November 12345, called and got a weather briefing. The last thing that I'll show you for weather briefing is ForeFlight. And you could abstract this to any AFB you want, Garmin Pilot, Wing X, whatever, the Stratus Insight, whatever you want. And the reason that I'm showing ForeFlight is because it's how I do it. And it's how you might be doing it as a student. And even if you don't use ForeFlight, all of the approaches that I'm going to be teaching here are still applicable depending on your EFB. So what do I do in ForeFlight? I come in and I start looking at the layers. First of all, I think it's a really great approach. So if you're not familiar, I'm going to layers. The first thing that I'm going to layer on is radar, the composite view. So we've got nothing on radar here. There's not large amount of radar reflectivity, not large amounts of moisture right now in this vicinity. If we zoom out, you can see that there is a bunch of activity up here. So we don't want to see those lightning strikes. We don't want to see yellow. We don't want to see green radar returns right now. We want to see none of that. All of that is water in the atmosphere. All of that's going to be raining or snowing or sleeting or something down on you. Bad stuff. So radar is the first thing that I look at really quickly. I layer that on. The second thing that I layer on, and you can look at all of these at the same time, I'm just showing you them individually. The second thing that I look at is I'm looking at something that has to do with clouds. I can go to the enhanced satellite. I can go to the color IR satellite. Any of these show me that there's clouds in the vicinity. The color IR tells me based upon the color what the tops are. But it's showing me there is some clouds in the area. And if I'm IFR, I really care about what the bases and tops are. As a VFR pilot, I just think it's important to know it's not clear. And we're going to back that up with looking at the METARs in a second. You can layer on other things like turbulence, icing, surface. I don't do any of that because of what I'm about to show you. So radar is really the big one here. But then I want to see the airmets and sigmets and the TFRs, not directly related to weather, but I think that's an important layer to have open. So now all of a sudden our chart turns some colors here. Why did it turn colors? Well, we've got airmet Sierra for this entire region for mountain obscuration. We've got an airmet Tango for a lot larger region. And I can look at each of these. So I've got to be familiar with, all right, so this airmet Tango, this turbulence advisory is for this entire region from the surface to 12,000 feet. Is this going to affect me? Yeah, probably. So I need to be aware of that. Mountain obscuration. So there's some clouds at relatively low levels, IFR and mountain obscuration in this area. I need to be aware of that. So after I'm done taking a look at that, I'm going to take that layer out. I start looking at the flight categories. So these green dots here. Green means VFR. Blue means marginal. Red means IFR. I want to take a look at my destination over here in Palm Springs. I also want to look at my departure. I want to see a lot of green as a VFR pilot. I don't want to really see any blue. I don't even want to see blue in the intended route of flight, because that means I'm going to either be way below clouds, probably scud running, or I'm going to be clouds. And as a new private pilot, I don't know that I'm comfortable with being over a cloud deck. I got to have options. Where do I go? If I can't get through those clouds, I don't want to be in that situation. So I want to see a lot of green. I can click on these airports and get a METAR, a decoded METAR. I can take a look at winds. I can take a look at visibility. I already know that in terms of visibility, all these airports are over 5 miles, otherwise they wouldn't be green. But I'm forming a really quick picture on what the current conditions are like. And all of this is really current conditions. It's given me information on my go, no-go decision right now. I look at METARs, I'm looking at the winds, I'm looking at, I already said sky coverage. Those are the types of things that I'm looking at in terms of layers on ForeFlight. I can then jump into the weather briefing in ForeFlight. So all the same stuff that I showed you on aviationweather.gov, I can do in ForeFlight. I'm not going to redo it in ForeFlight, but you've got your prognostic charts. You've got your service analysis, you've got your flight categories, you've got radar, you've got convective forecasts, you've got METARs, TAPs, you've got winds aloft, you've got ice, you've got all of that here in ForeFlight at your disposal. What's really cool about this is if you've got ForeFlight on your iPad and you do a packing on your trip, you've got it in the air with you too. Now, is it going to update? Well, I'll talk about more of that in a minute here. But you've got all of this at your disposal. I really love ForeFlight. It's a tool, Garmin Pilot, all of those types of EFBs do the same thing. So this is the now. I'd recommend doing multiples of these. I'd recommend getting a weather briefing from Live. I'd recommend backing it up in ForeFlight or Aviation Weather. I'd recommend looking at the situation on a kind of a non-aviation website. So that's the now. That's your go, no-go decision now. So now you're now flying around. Well, once you're flying around, what do you do? So as this stuff changes, how do you get updates on it? How do you figure out whether the weather is getting worse? So that's in-flight weather advisories come in. So there's a couple different ways that you can get weather. First of all, when you listen to you got me.
I know I will.
When you listen to Montgomery's ATIS still all the time says hazardous weather information available on HIWAS and flight service frequencies. Well, HIWAS doesn't exist anymore. You can't listen, most VORs, you can't listen on a VOR and hear hazardous weather information. So forget about that one. So how can you get weather as you're out flying around? Well, the first way you can get weather is by calling flight service. So flight service frequencies you can call. So as you take a look at a chart, you can try always the universal flight service frequency, 122.2, and talk to a radio, talk to flight service, ask them about the weather. You can take a look at some VORs and pick up flight service on those VORs. I'm trying to show you an example here. So over here on the Mission Bay VOR, you've got 122.4 as well. So you can pick up the radio and say, hey, San Diego radio, this is November 12345. I'd like a weather briefing. I'd like what are current conditions. You can talk to them. On a workload permitting basis, you can talk to ATC and ask ATC what's going on. Now, they might tell you we're too busy, unable. I would then say, well, I'm a student pilot and maybe get a little bit of extra help from them. One thing that I really like to do is as I'm on my route of flight, I like to tune up the METARs. I like to tune up the ASOS and the AWOS and the ATIS for airports that I'm flying over. I like to hear what the surface winds are doing. I like to hear what the visibility is down there. It's not going to give me forecast information, but if it's been an hour since I've launched and I'm en route, might be cool to listen to what's going on the ground where I am. Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? The last thing that I'd highly recommend is as you get your private pilot's license, as if you do become a ForeFlight user or a Garmin pilot user or a whatever EFB user, is to get an ADS-B receiver, a Stratus, a Sentry, a Stratux, and you can actually receive in-air weather over that system, over ADS-B. And that's really cool. It's real time, or it's lagged ever so slightly. You can see current METARs. You can see current radar. Well, you can see radar that's 20 minutes old, so you shouldn't make decisions at that point on it, but you can see the overall picture. Those are really great ways to continue forming a picture of what the weather is doing as you're out there flying around. The other thing that I might mention is, so that's as you're flying around, that was kind of how to prepare a weather briefing. The other things that I might mention, the kind of maybe non-traditional ways to inform your weather picture are, in addition to looking at forecast conditions on aviationweather.gov, in addition to getting a weather briefing, in addition to looking at TAFs, in ForeFlight or other weather products or other planning products, I can actually look at a couple, I think, really cool things in addition to the TAF. So I can look at the MOS, the model output statistics. As you fly around an area enough, you get used to whether TAFs are good or not. I personally think that Montgomery's TAF, which is actually Miramar's TAF, is absolute junk. It's garbage. It's never right. So if I care about Montgomery, how do I figure out what's going to go on at Montgomery? I can't look at their TAF. I like to look at Lindbergh's TAF. I like to look at Carlsbad's TAF. But then I also like to look at the MOS, the model output statistics. This is a computer program, not a human, deciding what they think is going to happen at a given airport. Lots of airports have MOSs and they go out pretty far. So this one at Montgomery goes out until Saturday at 11 p.m., 48 hours. Really good way to continue informing what the weather picture is. So, if I go up to Palm Springs where we're flying, I can look at the TAF there, but I can also look at the model output statistics. Here, which I think is a really great supplement. Does this agree with the TAF? Does this agree with aviationweather.gov? I think it's important to look at. Ivan, you have a question?
Yes, from your personal experience, how would you compare a TAF, which is done by, human forecasters that are, I'm not really sure where they are, but they're like specifically with MOS. Would you say that they agree most of the time? Would you say that they differ? How would you compare them?
So I think that most of the time they do agree. I think at times, back to personal minimums, I would suggest you take the worst of what you see. So if, for example, I see in the TAF that Montgomery is going marginal VFR at 8 p.m., but the MOS says Montgomery is going to be marginal at 6 p.m., I'd suggest you plan on getting your butt back at 6. I think generally speaking, they agree, but again, there are areas that I personally think TAFs are completely unreliable. Miramar is a great example. I think the TAF is wrong most of the time and proves to be wrong. Now, do you necessarily know what airports have reliable TAFs and not? No, and that's why I suggest comparing multiple weather products and really picking the worst of what you see, or interpolating what you see at the very least. Good question. Yeah.
Yes. So we can also say in that case, like we are comparing different weather products, but we have an example of San Diego where we have San Diego International. So maybe that would be another good example, you know, because they're relatively close by
Absolutely.
that you can kind of work on those tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Okay. So you just gave like a really big advice, if I can like if I can say it like that's kind of like a golden rule, right? Like you're like going towards the safe side.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially as a newer pilot, I think you have to go toward the safe side. You are less of an expert, and I mean this in a really in a not a combative, not an insultive way. You are not as good at weather as the people writing the TAFs. You are not as good at weather as the people creating aviation forecasts. So I would suggest, number one, that you listen, but number two, that you cross-reference and pick the worst of them to inform your decision. As you acquire knowledge, as you start to fly around, as you start to figure out what this actually looks like, you can change your interpretation of the weather forecast. But as you're starting out, I would highly advise that you take the most restrictive of the weather forecasts. The last thing that I'll show here, in something that I think is disregarded much of the time and doesn't deserve to be disregarded, is weather discussion. I don't know many pilots that look at this, to be honest. But weather discussion, I think, is hugely beneficial. So these are meteorologists talking in human language about what they think is going to happen. And a lot of times in discussion, you see things like, we're really unsure of our forecast. You'll see, yeah, we think there's a 60% chance of rain, but we are super unsure. Well, that'd be helpful to know, rather than 60% chance of rain and you go, man, that is, you know, it's probably going to rain, you know, that's over 50%. To know that there is very low confidence in that, I think, is really beneficial. So if we look at the discussion here for Palm Springs, and again, this is a bit of an outlook, and you'll see. So the coasts and the valleys scattered locally with broken clouds, bases 2,000 to 2,500, tops around 3,000, will continue until 1,800 Zulu. Low clouds will redevelop gradually, you know, during these times, some broken overcast ceilings overnight. Though timing is low confidence. So you don't see that in a TAF. You see in the TAF that, you know, something is going to happen from this period to this period, but you don't know that it's low confidence. Boy, that'd be helpful to know. Bases will mostly be 1,500 to 2,000, blah, blah, blah. So you'll see a lot of really good information here. And this weather discussion is going to be different than the weather discussion that you see over here at San Diego Lindbergh. So here, if we look at the weather discussion, you're going to see something completely different. So you can see a synopsis of the weather, right? A warming trend, low, high pressure, predominantly, blah, blah, blah. But then you scroll down to aviation. Well, actually, this is very similar. but you can see humans talking in a much more conversational language about what's going on. And again, all of this is about forming as complete of a picture as possible. All right, so with all of that said, what we're trying to do is form a big picture. But to recap what you know, Ivan, you just asked, if there's a doubt, don't do it. If there's any doubt that this might conflict with your personal minimums, don't do it. What I really love is at the start of the Air Safety Institute videos, oftentimes you hear, there were 2 instrument-rated pilots, one with 500 hours, one with 2,000 hours. They stood, like, you always hear them set up these scenarios, and it's never the 35-hour pilot on their first solo long cross country, right? It's never that. This stuff matters as you start to become a private pilot. You start getting some experience and kind of notches in your belt. That's really when this stuff starts to matter, is you don't want to be one of those Air Safety Institute people. I really like the 3 strikes rule. So if there are 3 kind of indeterminate, like, the clouds, you know, they look like they might come down, but you know, they look good. All the stuff is saying no, they're going to stay at 5,000 feet. It looks like there's some low pressure developing that's moving it, but no, the forecast really says that it should stay out. And it looks like there might be some gusty winds at the destination, but you know, that's way below my personal minimums for gusts and crosswinds. Well, the moment you have kind of 3 of those strikes, I think that's somebody telling you you probably shouldn't be going. 3 strikes, you're out. If you pick up, I think this is a really important point. I wish somebody would have told me explicitly as I was starting out. If you're going and flying into Palm Springs and you've made it all the way there, it's been a great flight, and you go to pick up the ATIS, and the ATIS says low-level wind shear advisory, reported 100 feet, short final, plus 15 knots, you don't have to land. If you're on final, you don't have to land. Just because you made it all the way there and you told them you've got information tango and you're ready to, it doesn't mean you have to land. You can say, you know what, Palm Springs Tower, we're going to go around, and we're going to go back to SoCal and pick a new destination. So diversions don't just have to happen as you're up flying around. You can be on final and reject the takeoff or reject the landing before you get low, and go figure something else out. Talk to ATC, call up flight service, look at your iPad. If there's a doubt, don't do it. So I'm going to conclude here. Making a go, no-go decision. If you have to get there, if you have to get home, drive. Don't fly. Build in time to drive. The I'm safe checklist, personal minimums, matter more than anything, in my opinion. That's why we started with them. Do you have recent experience in these conditions? If you're going to go fly in rain, have you flown in rain recently? Did you take a CFI doing flying in rain? Why would flying in rain, why would the first time you're flying in rain be when you're solo? That'd be dumb. Don't do it. Are you comfortable with the conditions? Is there anything hair standing on the back of your neck? Is the plane equipped for the conditions? You know, are you flying a light sport and 15 knots of crosswind, and because you've landed a 182 and 15 knots of crosswind, do you feel comfortable in that plane? I think this one's really important. What's the worst that you'll let a situation develop before you divert? What's the hard minimum on that? So often, back to Air Safety Institute, I guess I'm a junkie, I watch these all the time. Back to Air Safety Institute, so many of these weather videos where somebody crashed, at some point they call ATC and they say, yeah, you know, we know that there's yellow radar returns up ahead. We're gonna just fly for a little while longer. Maybe, you know, just take a look. We're gonna take a look at what's going on. You know, if we need to turn around, we will. Really? Well, what's the worst that you're going to allow it to get to before you go, you know what? These ceilings have come too low. The visibility's gotten too bad. I'm going to go find somewhere else. And then lastly, what is your backup plan? And then what's the backup plan to that backup plan? What are your alternates? This isn't just an IFR concept, right? If I'm flying to Palm Springs and I get over Julian, and that this caution here that says extreme turbulence and severe updrafts and downdrafts during high wind conditions, that when that happens and you went, well, holy crap, like I looked at the winds aloft and it wasn't bad. Well, do you keep going? Well, no, have an alternate. If I get to Julian and I'm getting rocked, don't fly over the mountains, go back, go to Borrego, go to Ramona, go somewhere else. Have backups to your backups. So I know I said I was concluding. I guess a couple key points from this. Follow your personal minimums. Don't change them on the day you fly. You can change them whenever you want. Don't change them on the day you fly. Always have an out, have several outs. And thirdly, know before you go. Keep a vigilant watch. Be aware of deteriorating conditions. A weather briefing isn't a one-time thing. You don't just do it and then say, okay, great, I'm briefed, I'm gonna go take off. And keep yourself apprised, keep yourself updated, continue to consult in-flight weather advisory services. Realize meteorologists that get paid for this, that went to school for this, get it wrong all the time. And conditions develop that they didn't forecast all the time. And so if it happens to them, it might happen to you. So stay on top of it. So that's what I've got.
Very nice. Very well done.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I was looking at the PTS here, and I know we all kind of like are guessing and shrugging our shoulders what the actual check ride is going to be when it comes to weather. But I mean, you hit everything on the PTS in, I mean, your way of I guess you have teaching experience, and it's extremely obvious. Like, you're very engaging. You could be telling me complete bullshit and lies, and I'd probably believe you. So I'd sink there with you. But yeah, so I thought you had a really good sprinkling of ADM in there, or a very large amount of ADM, which was good. Your personal experience, I think, is always good, because, you know, you relate that everyone is fallible, and we all screw up sometimes, and that always hammers the point home. The regulations, the 91-103, that was good. I mean, obviously it's not all feels, it's the legal stuff, the legal factors about getting weather briefings. The 1-800 weather brief, I think examiners have like a particular love for the old-fashioned stuff. I don't know about Julie particularly, but I think you would be remiss if you didn't mention that. So that was really good, because I know that's probably something they want to hear about. And, well, you should still teach your students about, you know, picking up the phone. And so yeah, that was good. And that sheet was also a nice touch. I don't know did you create that?
Yeah, I stole it from somebody else, but then I made a PDF so you can import it to ForeFlight and write on it in ForeFlight. Because I don't keep a knee board. I only use the scratch pad in ForeFlight. But what's really cool is you can open this in ForeFlight and write on it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was nice. The ForeFlight stuff, I use ForeFlight as well, so it was relatable to me. I don't know how much she will dig or, you know, like you using ForeFlight. I don't see the issue, because it's the same products from Aviation Weather, and I know you opened aviationweather.gov and showed that. I don't know. I thought you did a good job touching on some of the products without necessarily going and saying this is how you read a TAF. I don't think that's the spirit of what this is about. One thing I would mention as a student pilot is, you know, I don't want to sound crotchety, and back in my day we had to do this, that, or the other, but, you know, just use your eyes. Like, when you're out flying, you know, look around, and if you see Virga out there, if you see something that looks just weird, don't start digging through ForeFlight and looking at your ADS-B. I mean, if you're getting kind of the willies and it's not setting right as a 20-hour, you know, student, just it probably isn't right, and now's not the time to test your limits.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
absolutely, need to hit that a product doesn't have to tell you. If it looks shitty, don't do it.
And I mean, I think we're all kind of guilty of that. Like, we were also technology saturated, and it's a great thing, but sometimes you just take a step back, and you know, a thunderstorm from your car driving around looks the same as a thunderstorm from the air, more or less. So if it looks nasty, then you probably shouldn't be flying. So, but I thought you did a really nice job. Your delivery was really good. You hit everything on the PTS in a very well organized and engaging way. So I don't know, man. I thought it was good.
Thank you. No, that's great feedback. Really good feedback.
Who's next? Me or Taryn?
Taryn will grill me later on and tell me how terrible I did.
We all could hear. We want to hear how terrible.
Like a French first and last name.
Yeah. Is it French? I thought it's Italian, right? Italian.
Italian. Okay, my bad. Okay, I'll go next. Yeah, I think, it's important to start with a personal example, and I think it's important for two reasons. It just shows, to a student that the instructor is not perfect.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, I have no shame to, like, give my own example in a lot of things that I do.
Yeah.
So that was completely like to the point. And for example, in the FOIs, for example, when I would do like defense mechanism, if she were to ask me, I would maybe say which one is mine, or maybe not. It depends. But like, you have to start from yourself. So I'm always going to try to, like, say, hey, like, I made that mistake as well. And I think it's really important, because it kind of like brings a student into a perspective that, they're not. It depends on the student, basically. We have to know the personality types. But some people that they are like naturally insecure. Those kind of people are. Just a sec, sorry.
And then he's gone.
I'll finish his thought. Some people are naturally insecure, and
Okay, sorry about that. I had a little distraction. And how is it called in communication
What do you mean?
when we have distractions? Interference, right?
Oh, interfere. Yeah. You're back to FOI. I'm done with FOI. I don't want any more of that crap.
Teaching moment. Yeah. Okay. So that brings me to the next point. It brings me to your, like, I would. The example was really good. Like, I was really focused. I would just try to keep it just a little bit shorter.
Yeah, I agree.
And have like a reference. So I say,
Yep.
hey, I was going with my friends. We were at the Grand Canyon. If you want to know, I'll show you. And this is what happened. It was scary. So
I agree. As it, it's funny because I didn't rehearse that, but like in my head I was like, oh, I can tell that story in 20 seconds. Well, clearly, as I was telling it, I'm like, yeah, I'm going way too into this. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
But that's why we do all of this. I'm happy that you mentioned ADSB. The main thing that I got from your lesson, it's not really a criticism to your lesson. It is more like a criticism to myself. Is that my idea, like, how to approach this was pretty dry. Like, I was thinking about, like, going through all of the models and whatnot. Like, up to a certain degree. This was much more engaging, much more like fluid, and much more to the point. So that's something that I personally learned. But when it comes to, there isn't really like too many things to criticize, because you really did go. There is one thing from the PTS windshield. So
I think it's really funny that they just specifically mentioned wind shear.
Yeah.
I know it's there, and so because I didn't want to teach to anything specifically necessarily, that's why I mentioned at the very end, though, like, if you're on final and you hear low level wind shear, like, go.
Yeah. It's, like, they don't mention like air meds, they don't mention SIGMED, but they mention like wind shear specifically. Like, so theoretically you don't have to talk about SIGMED, but so I don't think it's going to be an issue. Like,
I thought about like talking about wind shear and when I was talking about like winds aloft but I didn't want to spend, I mean, look, I talked for like 45 minutes just on what I had.
Yes.
Like, if you start digging in, well, here's winds aloft and you can see there's an unstable lapse rate. And I think that just becomes really bleh.
Chase, you could sprinkle wind shear into your Grand Canyon story and say that you encountered wind shear on the final, and just like that's a
good plan.
Like a 7-second kind of, and as we were on final, suddenly my speed was plus 15 and then dropped -5, and well,
that's a really good idea. That's a really good idea.
When in doubt,
I just took a note on that. Chase story of Grand Canyon, wind shear on final.
There you go.
Wind shear, and then you said like, I had some icing on the wings, and I had carburetor ice as well.
Turns out it was an inch of clear ice.
Yeah, like it's I think the most important thing that you like nail towards the end, and that it cannot be like emphasized enough, and you I think you did like a really great job. The point of the whole lesson is basically what it says exactly in the PTS: factors to be considered in making a go no go decision.
Yep.
Like if I have a feeling, like if you don't nail that, you're gonna blow like through the whole lesson.
Yeah.
And you were very, very specific on that, like very, very specific. So like I don't know, like a lot of positive things. I learned more than I can actually. Let's see if I have some other note. Actually, I don't have a note, but I do have like one information. We just started a subscription, $20 a year, like $2 a month, and it's going to give you an hourly outlook.
Oh,
Because
really?
yeah, I just subscribed like this morning, so I know. So
Huh.
instead of 3 hours, you're gonna get an hour. So that's pretty cool. I just again another criticism, but like pretty cool thing. It's like brand new that they have.
Yeah, that is cool. I love Windy. It's a great app.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like this is like this is maybe probably like I would have covered all the points, but I doubt it would have been as fluent as yours. And I think that's my main learning point. And she can go wherever she wants from there. She can
And
go.
that's exactly right. Is I have, so what I did was, and I didn't write this, but I just copied some other lesson plans like weather theory in at the very end. So if she's like, okay, great, I want you to tell me about, I don't know, whatever, I could be like, oh yeah, sure, I've got that in my lesson plan at the very, very, like the appendix. Like, yeah, I can tell you about, whatever else.
So
So
you have that option just to have it like straight there. You don't have
yeah,
to fumble around.
I literally just wrote appendix and copied and pasted somebody else's lesson plan in the appendix.
That's nice.
What do you guys think about? I think it's a little bit not kind of the norm, but what do you think about starting with personal minimums? Was that effective?
Actually, that's a good question. That's something actually that I didn't take a note of. I would it kind of like it depends. One thing that I would like touch on, or maybe be careful on, maybe not on the checkride itself, but maybe like in a teaching in a future, is that I found mostly online that there is a lot of bullshit, right? Like like people were solving in 3 hours in 76, and like they land at least with like
Yeah.
with 20 knots of cross. So whenever like I'm discussing some kind of like things and events that I did, and I did like had my share of like scary events, I actually rarely mention them. And when you were as an instructor, or you like as an experienced pilot, to go through that personal minimums, I would maybe add like a really big disclaimer, which you did. I would maybe just emphasize it even further, that those are your personal minimums, what you just
Yes.
said, but by no means, that's normal. Everybody has their own. They go up, they go down, and that you shouldn't compare yourself to like no one's personal minimums. Maybe it's not like a checkride topic, but I found that like frustrating, like personally, when I was like soloing, and then when I was doing this, and then I was doing that, and so that's why whenever I do something, whenever something happened to me, I'm gonna say like, hey, like I was either lucky, this wasn't a good idea, I wouldn't recommend it.
Right.
There would be like a teaching moment. I would definitely like never like talk to a student and say, hey, like I landed like without a wheel and they closed the airport and I was in the news. Like I wouldn't do that, like I wouldn't say that.
I thought your sharing of personal minimums, I thought it was good, because I mean that is a really core way of making your no go decision. If you are feeling like maybe you're short on time, maybe cut down and not necessarily share all of your personal minimums. But
especially IFR.
Yep, I
You know,
agree. When after doing it, I was like, why am I sharing IFR ones? That doesn't make any sense.
but that's fine. I thought it was a good way to tie in the ADM stuff, but I think you could probably chop a little bit of it.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Thanks, guys. That's helpful.
yeah, you know, I'm definitely, you know, learning, not just from you, Chase, but, you know, Zach, and I'm hoping Tara is going to agree, like, in her own way. But, you know, there is like so many like different ways, like, how do you say, like, to skin this cat, or
Yeah,
whatever the expression is.
and I think that's the key. I have found these to be really valuable. I mean, if we get to the point where it's like, okay, this is a waste of time, nobody's going to hurt my feelings by saying we shouldn't do these. But like, I've learned a lot, not only by teaching, or from teaching rather, but also watching you guys teach, because it's kind of like you kind of go, oh, well, you know, maybe I should do it that way, or it's been really helpful. So
Yeah,